Thoughts that have a lot of power can be very consuming when they cross your mind. But when you're not good with powerful thoughts, you put them aside for a long time. I'm not good with fright. I can't read Stephen King. I can't watch television. Even the dumbest, soapiest television shows make me cry like a baby. It's pathetic, really. A girl who had lost some limbs was saying, "What did I do to deserve this?" When it comes down to something, I guess Frank Herbert said in Dune, that might have been surpassed bearing. What I'm trying to get at is the hard, crushing weight of a very powerful moment is when it comes to be very vivid to me that none of this had to happen, that it was senseless. Now, I understand that it is foolish and impossible for me to try to make the ringleaders of the sandbaggers in Carnegie Mellon University reform their ideas about me. It's too exciting to them to be cruel. I'm an object of derision to them. And they set up this stuff about Lenin. Reminds me when you look at the world, like people who have foreclosed on Afghanistan schools and Pakistani girls' schools. You know, Malala is chummy with Hillary. She's not going to take a stand in my defense. But they have something in common with the Israelis who blow up schools purposely. Now, my father was chair of philosophy of education at the University of Pittsburgh. It was theoretically possible for Louis Lapham to say, "I sympathize with this man. He was targeted as the child of a humanist." That's obviously what happened. He could have said, "Hold on, Reagan. Don't go away. I want to ask you some questions about this situation because it's your boogeyman that got attacked. How do we know you're not behind it? And if you're not behind it, it's time to reform your tune a little bit in light of how this operated." It would have changed everything if they had been even remotely honest about my love for Leslie, about my approval of King Crimson, about my attempts to understand what was going on campus, about my attempts to fit in despite being deaf, about my long struggle with the East Liberty underworld. If they'd been even remotely honest about any of that, rather than say it's a child of a humanist and we're going to use him as a child of a humanist, it wouldn't have led to a situation of entrenched hatred by Brian Eno getting the upper hand in the switchboard mechanisms of Ivy League schools. Because Lewis could have said very loudly and clearly, "This is an ideological crime we're witnessing. It doesn't have anything to do with James Curry personally. It's because it couldn't have been anybody else. They had to use the child of a humanist." Steve Langer came right out and said that. "I'm not sorry for anything I did, only that it had to be you." And Lapham instead took Steve Langer's approach. Let's use this thing as a cautionary tale. It's the way he framed it. And it's very hard on me to encounter moments. They make me very deaf to hope. They make me very gloomy to see, when things really, when the way they use me leads to tragedy, for example, I get this crushing weight of that didn't have to happen. If only. The might have beens are past bearing, as how Frank Herbert puts it. And it always, for me, comes down to Louis Lapham's New York shoplifter approach to what happened. He didn't have to go that road. There was nothing stopping him from saying, we know you were experimented on cruelly, and it was because you were the child of a humanist, and it was an ingredient in a special operation. If he had said, I know it wasn't Reagan, I would have believed him. But instead, Ming-Na Wen and him connubialed to say, Mac is so confused, let's make him think he thinks it was Reagan. Now, the evidence that I have uncovered darkly implicates Reagan in a way that's too profound for me to deny. And I'm not going to be accomplice to something like this. It's not self-incrimination or fear thereof. It's common decency. When there's a question, to note that question so that if it can be asked appropriately, in good order, it is asked. When it comes to Reagan, for example, what did his lawyers for the whole business have me in D.C. doing for his charade? What's he doing hiding that image of pro-Nazi sensibilities in his wartime film with Errol Flynn? And why is there this pernicious pattern of alluding to the Kennedy assassination throughout his cinema movies? And I could show you the scenes of it. I didn't know any of that was going on. I was inclined to exonerate him. I wouldn't have gone into any of that if Lapham had been charitable enough to identify the problem rather than masquerade it. And Lapham certainly was not identifying the problem as Reagan knew. Quite to the contrary. He was identifying the problem of James Curry has too much light on him and there's going to be these kinds of questions and we got to shut those questions down. And he was not the person who you would expect that from. So when and I liked Lapham. I didn't like Reagan. I admit I didn't like Reagan, but I really liked Lapham. I don't understand what could have possessed him to behave this way towards me. Surely he knew that the business about John Lennon was crazy. Had nothing to do with me. Somebody put my name on it. That doesn't mean I signed it. And they made up all this. Well, there's no point in discussing what they did or didn't do, or what they can do, or how they're operating, what they're implying, what they're threatening, what they consider to be the music to their ears. But it didn't have to get to the point where these manipulators and targeters had the media enthralled with their fable and nobody willing to ask any questions. It would have been very simple for Louis Lapham to say he's the child of a humanist and was attacked categorically, but for that reason, had nothing to do with him. He was attacked categorically for being the child of a humanist. And that would have been the truth. And it would have been relatively easy to bring somebody in as a babysitter. Not very expensive. To make sure I learned sign language, they got to the bottom of my health concerns, and they reformed me and extricated me from the situation. They didn't have to go the road of making this horrible squawking noise about favoritism, profiteering, getting out of line, provincial norms. All they would have had to do was identify what was the working component of the situation, which is I was targeted as an ideological function of an attack on the University of Pittsburgh. And that they ruled out. And Lapham landed like some kind of weird Darth Vader from Oppo world, the opposite of what he professed to believe, the opposite of what he professed to advocate. And who did he do it for in all perversity? The assassins themselves. They brought in Buckley with Bowie and were pulling all kinds of lip-reading stunts. And Fripp and Bush were sending Cockman. Why can't you stop yourselves? Why do you have to destroy Malala's safety as a person who make her out to look like a Mountie bank, to sway Hillary Clinton's portfolio of misconduct with Louis Lapham towards me? Why do you have to threaten innocent people and bystanders to prove some sort of cosmic, fraternal, militant, eternal question that it's sadistic? And behind it all, you have this guy, John Stockwell, who says, what I learned from torturing people was they never can break contact with the hope of reaching out to you, of reasoning with you. This man is a professional sadist from the CIA who has followed me around with the help of Martin Sheen, who came to Pittsburgh so he could do like this to me. And this idea that they keep reaching out to you to to try to reach through to your humanity is answered from the wingnuts with, if you try to help them, they'll only turn on you. And the cruel, pettifogging system of interrogation that was the script. Yoko Ono is going to drill you with mean-spirited allusions to how you're being represented behind the scenes forever. And you're going to reach out to them thinking you can reason with them. Well, ha 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 ha. They laugh maliciously. I wasn't just a child of a humanist, I was a symbol of the United States of America. And it's not because it had nothing to do with me. You could say, oh, you don't deserve to be this status symbol. But they identified me as that status symbol, is the point. That's how it's like burning a cross. The cross isn't a symbol of fire and brimstone. I'm not saying that being a symbol of the United States of America is like burning the cross. Burning the flag is usually different idea. But it's not a good thing, is the point. It's not a good thing. They're quasi investing this idea of Aaron Bushnell being the supernova Ouspensky fourth dimensional superhero. And it comes from a psychotic mind, and it's full of this rhapsody. And Louis Lapham did not have to pull this malicious prank for New York City. What they should have said, don't you see where this leads? We must put a stop to it. That would have been responsible behavior. They talk about, you get Rick Wolf coming saying, his buddy, you know, to have freedom requires responsibility. To have sanity, a minimum administrative level requires taking responsibility for something. That dehumanizing, that unnerving, that cruel. And years later, they're still doing it. They're still sabotaging recovery. They're still using tactics of terror. My health has deteriorated to the point where the next thing's going to put me over the tipping point. And evidently, these monsters live to see it. And they call themselves responsible administration. None of it had to happen. And that's what John Stockwell fiendishly delights in. It's the idea that you reach out to them as though they're humans, as though they can try to sympathize, as though they might understand. And when you get to the idea that it didn't have to happen, they begin to laugh with malice.